Welcome, everyone. You are watching Direct Line Live. Why is our music still playing? We should not be doing that. There we go. Okay, that's what it was. I forgot to mute myself. Anyways, welcome, everyone. It is January 15th, Direct Line Live with Brian Griffiths, the Dean of Maryland Politics, our answer to Andy Rooney. If there's basically, he should be filling in. He should be on 60 Minutes. Welcome to the show, Brian. I am co-hosting because our regular co-host, Jackie Saxton, is filling the role of Jimmy Carter by observing elections on the lower shores of Maryland.
Well,
Welcome, everybody.
I hope she's doing that on her feet and not in a box somewhere. That would be terrible.
Ba-boom. So actually, I would have done a slightly different introduction than that. I would have called you the king of Republican Maryland social media.
Wow.
I think
high praise.
Yeah. Well, Dean sounds like you're retired, and actually you're still like. Forgive me, I want to kind of get a sense of what your status is before we go back and talk to the beginning, which is so Duckpin last May 31st, yep. I think it was. Well, I won't say it closed its door, but you kind of you shut it down, and yet it seems to be making a more regular appearance since then. So what exactly is the status of Duckpin right now?
So the Duckpin, I decided in late May, in the middle of May, it was pretty much once we started getting past the primary here in Maryland as the presidential primary season was winding down. I was fed up. I was like, you know what? This is pointless. I've had enough. It's time to ride off into the sunset and let somebody else fill my shoes. And then over the summer, I started getting the itch again. It's like, at some point when you write as long as I've written, you're a writer, and writers have to write. So at some point I realized that I had a whole bunch of stuff that I needed to get out, but that I was going to relaunch the Duckpin with a little more of a focus, as opposed to relying on other people like you and Dwight also had written for it as well. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to try to change the focus a little bit, just make it my thoughts, generally once a week. And I think I was officially retired for 100 days before relaunching it. So much had happened over the summer, right? We had, we had the war, the war escalating in Israel. We had the war still going on in the Ukraine. We had the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. We had Joe Biden leave the ticket. So much crap happened just in those 100 days that I was gone. I realized I got a lot of things I still need to say. So, it was time to kind of come back and at least, change it up a little bit, make it more focused on the thoughts that I had, doing what I had originally intended to do, which is kind of branch out a little more, not just in the political sphere, but also encompassing more of that culture, sports, other topics, that I originally wanted to write about when we launched this back in 5 years ago, almost now, and just kind of focus on I finally decided to monetize it. And one of the reasons I did that is I decided that, well, if we're going to do this, let's at least make it worth our while. Let's at least give me the impetus to keep writing. If you're accepting money from people in order to read something, you owe it to them to provide them a product. So I kind of made the deal with myself. It's like, we're going to start accepting payment for this, but we've got to commit to doing that product at least once a week. So that's kind of been a good mix. Part of the problem kind of in that before time was I felt not just the urge to post something nearly every day, but also that urge that if something happened, I had to jump on it immediately. And that wasn't healthy for me, at least at that moment. And I'd gone through a lot of years of that. And so I decided, let's just kind of focus on once a week. We can pick a topic. And if that topic is still relevant in a couple of days' time, great. And if it's not, we'll write about something else. But it's kind of getting control of the Duckpin away from letting the flow of writing and the flow of media control me.
So we'll continue to get your baseball coverage. I take it with Royal Baseball. Spring training starts soon.
Spring
But
training.
on the other hand, we also have the gift that always gives, which is the legislature is back in session. Which, I don't know about you, but those 3 months would always generate a lot more.
It does.
More reasons to write than the rest of the year. Let me go back. Yeah, Coach, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, but that's one of the things that like social media does allow us now, and even some of the tools that we've enabled on the Duckpin now allow us to do is to do a little more free-form, short-form content. It's a lot easier for me to pull this phone out of my pocket and cut a minute-long video about a topic that doesn't have to be as polished, doesn't have to fill a product that I'm literally providing to people as something that I'm writing. So, it's kind of about being a good mix and match of finding the right product to offer the right platform.
So let's go back to when this all started. It was with Red Maryland. It wasn't 20 years ago, but it was a number.
I started writing 20 years ago. It was actually January of 2005.
Yeah.
I started my own personal blog, the very astutely named Griffiths.com. And, I started writing there, and that was about 2 years worth of writing there. And that was a little more, it was 2005. It was still the Wild West of blogs. I started because I'd seen blogs write so much on the national level, and I wanted to be part of that conversation and also provide a little more perspective about that local, that local coverage that wasn't really getting covered in the blogs at the time. And of course, that infrastructure built up over time. I even wound up getting coverage in the Baltimore Sun because of what I was writing on my blog. Red Maryland started in summer of 2007. That was Strife, from Red State, who still is with Red State, who lived in Maryland, brought myself together and a bunch of other people, including Greg Klein, Mark Nugent, and a few others, and brought us together to launch Red Maryland. And Red Maryland, obviously, for people who know Red Maryland, you've heard of it, almost certainly if you've been around in Maryland politics for a minute. We were far and away the influential, the big dog in the hunt when it comes to new media in Maryland, so much so even that we briefly were writing in the Baltimore Sun, had our own column and section in the Baltimore Sun, which was an interesting experience.
Until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't, and there's a variety of reasons why that happened.
Yep.
You might be able to get back in now that it's supposed to be under new ownership soon. You might get back in there.
If they could, you know what? Look, as they say, everybody's got a price. My loyalty is not for sale, but it can be rented. I kid. But of course I would listen if they called. Different ownership, different management, different folks. It certainly couldn't turn out any worse than the Baltimore Banner experiment did. And then Red Maryland closed down in 2020. Greg decided that he wanted to bring it to that he wanted to step aside, and we decided that it was best for just kind of sunset the brand. And we kind of rode out into the sunset right after that 2020 primary, and the Duckpin launched 5 days later. So that kind of takes you to that. As I said, we were with the Sun there for a while. I was writing columns for the Capitol in Annapolis for several years. Briefly, I was writing a column for the Baltimore Banner. I think that lasted 3 columns before they chickened out and decided to. Technically, I was quit before they told me I couldn't write for them anymore. But
weren't you also in the BAL or CBM, one of those two stations?
We did do the radio thing. We actually did have a radio show on. It was actually WAMD in Aberdeen. We had that for quite a while, and then for a few months, and then they sold the radio station. And we did do fill-in work on WBAL. Sitting in with Bob Ehrlich and C4 and a couple of those other folks. And of course, we had our podcast which went on for 450 shows, I think it was. That was literally the last thing we did as a network. Was we closed out on that podcast, a 2-hour banger on in June of 2020. It's actually, you can still go to the Facebook page and still find the whole thing. A lot of those shows are still up there. So yeah, we've kind of, I like to tell people, when it comes to media in Maryland, I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two, so it's been a lot. It's been quite a ride.
Yeah. So Brian, tell us, when you were doing Red Maryland, when did you kind of get to the point where you thought, hey, this is actually taking traction, people are watching, people are paying attention?
It was pretty quick. It was actually very quick, because by the time, shortly, there was a whole fight about bylaws and all sorts of other minutia, and we had a whole thing about it. And Andy Harris, when he was still in the state Senate, was involved in it, and all sorts of craziness. And people really started paying attention to what we were saying. And I think the real time where we realized how much of an impact we had was not when Republicans were talking about what we were writing, but it was when Democrats were talking about what we were writing, and you had Democratic apparatchiks, and you had legislators talking about what we were writing about, and that really settled in, kind of how much of an influence we were having. I think that kind of reached its peak when Mike Miller, God rest his soul, called Red Maryland the devil on the floor of the state Senate, which I mean, does it really get any better than that? To be called the devil by arguably the devil himself.
So that actually captures an interesting aspect or dynamic to social media, which is the kind of troll back and forth, so that sometimes the pieces that get the most attention are precisely because you get the reaction on the other side, and it then goes back and forth. And how much did that dynamic influence what you wrote or how you wrote stuff?
It depends, because a lot of times in the early days, a lot of the back and forth that we had was arguing with other bloggers, which was kind of just part of what the blogosphere was like back then. It wasn't necessarily the race for clicks. It was the argument of ideas. And so a lot of times that did play into that. One of the reasons why we ultimately decided to wind down Red Maryland was because that troll culture kind of took over, right? One of the problems that we always saw with Red Maryland at the end, particularly the last 5 years or so, was people didn't want to read the damn article, right? All they wanted was the talking points. All they wanted was the meme. All they wanted was the infographic. And a lot of what we were writing about was more nuanced than an infographic. You can't start talking about the arcana of statute or parliamentary procedure or whatever nonsense Democrats were trying to pull in the state house, or whatever Martin O'Malley was trying to do as governor, or whatever Democrats were trying to do at the county level. You can't really suss that down to a meme. And when people's attention span started getting short like that, two things happened. One, it really started to inflame a lot of people on our social media. People would get mad about things that we didn't even write about. So we'd write about something about, I'm just going to pull something out of the hat here. People would write about something we said about a Democrat who committed a crime. It's like, well, you guys have John Leopold. It's like, yeah, we didn't like him either. It's like we called balls and strikes. We were not afraid to challenge our own side, which certainly pissed off a lot of Republicans. And
I can attest to that. Yes.
And the fact that people just wanted to not talk about the facts, they didn't want to push the damn button. And as that went on, it became more and more of a challenge to properly influence policy and kind of get the reaction that we wanted. The other thing, too, was the fact that in the last 5 years of Red Maryland, people stopped caring so much about state politics. everything got tied into Trump, everything got tied into national politics, and people didn't care about anything other than us talking about national politics, which we did to a small extent. But the bread and butter of what we did was write about state and local issues from Maryland. I mean, Maryland was in our title, for crying out loud. So,
Right.
you know, you got 1,000 people writing about what's going on in Washington, but ultimately, you know, Donald Trump's not going to affect whether your trash gets picked up on Tuesday, you know, or whether or not your kids are going to have a properly funded school according to your property tax rate. That's where government really meets the road with the average citizen. You know, people can talk about, you know, globalism, this and you know, DEI, that, and this, that, and the other thing when it comes to national issues. But 1 or 2% of what goes on in Washington really touches American people at their core. The real work of government gets done at state houses, in city halls, in county council chambers. And that's what we as a country have lost sight of.
And I think you came on the stage right at the right time, as back when you started in 07, 06 is when you guys started. There used to be a lot of local newspapers. Towson had a small paper. You kind of filled the void, as did many other that covered the local issues. You know,
especially as so many of those started closing. You saw the Baltimore Sun start consolidating those. The Gazette closed. The Gazette of Politics and Business, which was, of course, a great resource. And it wasn't for a long time after that. I mean, Maryland Reporter filled that void for a little while, and eventually we got Maryland Matters and a couple others. But, you know, it was quickly turning into a news desert. And having not just the platform, but also the contacts to have people tell us information and to kind of send us tips along the way, provided us with the ability to cover those issues that people just didn't care about. I mean, we spent more time covering the 36th district Senate seat vacancy than the Baltimore Sun, I think, spent covering the budget that year. I mean, you know, it's that kind of real, you know, that kind of nuance that you can really get into. And sometimes you're just in the right place at the right time. You know, 2010, I was, you know, when I was YR chair, I was at an event in Southern Maryland. I was some Charles County, and I just happened to be at the event where Mark Fisher got punched by one of his opponents in the stomach, and I reported on it. And that's partially why Mark Fisher's a delegate today, because he won that primary. You know, so, you know, that was, I think, when we really started realizing that the influence that we had is that, like, people were winning elections based on what we reported. And then people were winning elections based on who we endorsed. And I mean, that's high praise when your readership really listens to that sort of thing, and it really starts to become something that people really pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. And we've got go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, transitioning, we've talked about where things were and how things evolved. I can't help but notice, as others I hope were, Facebook, you know, TikTok and Instagram. Talk to you. You've talked, first of all, you've said you're now using more focused, more, obviously more visual. Can you elaborate on kind of how social media for you works now? And obviously you're not writing the way you used to. That's one, but what's more about that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of times it's something comes up and I want to see a video about it, or I want to make a video about it. When Heather Bagnall introduced her bill about witches, which is, by the way, the dumbest thing I think I've seen in a long time, and that's saying something from the General Assembly of Maryland. You know, I went to TikTok and made a video about it, because I'm not going to dedicate an entire piece in Red Maryland to a bill about witches, right? I'll talk about abortion until the cows come home, but I'm not going to talk about a bill about witches, because it's just ultimately stupid and not that important. But TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, you can get kind of the audience, you know, to at least share that with people. And maybe people see it, maybe people don't. You know, realistically, the short form social media for me, it's just, you know, you get your kicks on Route 66, right? I got something to say, I'm going to say it. People watch it, fine. If they don't, I don't care. You know, it's a way to just share some information, and to just talk about things without making a giant production of it. You know, a lot of people, these content creators, you know, they have elaborate setups and they do this, that, and they do the shot, but a lot of them are, you know, they exist to tell jokes or, you know, dance or cuss or whatever. And I'm just there. It's like, okay, well, here's something I'm going to react to, and there we go. I'll be honest, I don't put a hell of a lot of thought into it. You know, every once in a while, a video goes viral on TikTok. Cool. 290,000 people watch it. Okay. What does that get me? Nothing. So if I'm helping influence people to think about policy or issues that are important to me, great. If not, all right, maybe I pissed off somebody. Who cares? You know, so realistically, the focus of where I'm putting my energy and providing real quality content is the blog, the Duckpin. And because, again, people are literally paying for that.
Right.
Now, if somebody wants to pay me to make them a video, I'll put a lot of effort into it. You know, but, you know, like I said, it's a lot of, oops, I just kicked my light. Talk about professional broadcasting here. Yep, there it goes. You saw it.
We'll let you know if the flames start.
Hey,
well, that's
Brian, you think Christine O'Donnell's watching? She cast a spell to knock the light over because
you know, in one of my social media posts,
Christine O'Donnell was.
I actually used that clip in one of my Heather Bagnall posts, believe it or not. I actually downloaded that just because. And of course, people these days have the attention span of a gnat, so they don't remember who Christine O'Donnell is. But you know, it was a good chuckle. Now it's funny because now Christine O'Donnell might have actually won. You know, so you know, given the craziness of modern politics.
Talk to me about the difference in the audience and the difference in the audiences for the various. Obviously, you've got the Substack, you've got Duckpin,
yep.
Facebook, a little older audience, presumably.
Yeah.
How, do you see a difference in the reaction that you get from one space to another, or how does it work out?
A lot of times, depends on what I talk about. If I talk about Trump, the Facebook reaction is usually very negative. The TikTok reaction is a little more positive. Instagram's a weird nut to crack. YouTube, it's all over the place. But if I talk about abortion, you know, Instagram's ready to hang me, and Facebook's a little more supportive. So it kind of shows you where the demographics really lie. You know, TikTok does lean a little more liberal, and Facebook's probably a little more conservative. YouTube is a little more in the middle, and Instagram is like I said, Instagram's weird. Instagram's I don't understand Instagram.
Instagram never really was supposed to be for putting opinions. It's more for sharing your photos. And I've got 5,000 photos I've posted on my Instagram, actually. How many people have seen it? Maybe 25, 30, you know, but I enjoy taking pictures. But Brian, so what's, you know, like tell us some of the biggest challenges biggest stories that you've had as a blogger, as a journalist, as a writer. Like, is there any one particular Democrat that basically, other than Mike Miller, that basically just runs the other way when they see you, kind of like the way Patrick Leahy goes the other way when he sees me?
Hopefully, Mike Miller doesn't. Hopefully, Mike Miller doesn't see you anytime soon, right?
See, that's the thing about Mike Miller, though, right? You know, Mike Miller was an old school Democrat. And when I say that he'll cuss you out on the floor, but, you know, off the floor, you know, it's just handshakes and how you doing and everything else like that. He was able to separate business from the personal. And so often these days, and it's not recently, it's been the last 20 years, it's a lot of times it's become personal, you know? You guys remember when I almost got into a fist fight
with John Wafer?
No. Well, that was a different one.
I've got that on video somewhere.
Roger Hale wanted to go out, wanted to step outside with me. He's like, "Why don't we step outside and talk about this?" And I said, "Let's go." And Roger never showed up. So,
was this at an Anne Arundel County Lincoln Day dinner?
No, this was at the state party chairman forum in 2013 in Montgomery County.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Because I know
you were there.
Dinners back in the days, if there was not a fight that happened, it wasn't a full dinner. You know, I remember Scott Schaefer got into a fight with Steve Shue at one of the dinners. Then the following year, they had something else. You know,
I got kicked out of a unity party once. I almost started a brawl. Technically, it wasn't me starting it, but
was this
I was going to finish it. This was 2006. This is way early.
I didn't realize we need to do a unity anything in 06.
This was in Anne Arundel County after the county executive primary. This was Don Dwyer's people being mad at me, ironically enough. But, you know, look, and you guys know this. I say what I'm going to say, and you either accept it or you don't. And if I piss you off, okay. And if not, look, it's just business. You know, it's only personal when people make it personal. And some people have made it personal. And we don't need to talk about that, do we?
You and I kind of made it personal at one point, you know.
Yes, we did.
So let me come back. Let me come back to the social media piece. Obviously, sure. Very much in the news today is Supreme Court's consideration of the ban on TikTok that was passed overwhelmingly in Congress. It's kind of fascinating to see who voted against it. For example, Alex Mooney and AOC. That's not a pair that you often see voting together. What's your thinking about the ban?
And that's also weird when you think that I would have voted with Alex Mooney and AOC, right?
Right.
You know. Yeah. But if you think about it, they're coming at it from the same perspective, which is the First Amendment perspective, right? Which is the same way I come at it. The issue is not, realistically, the issue is not even what TikTok itself, right? The issue is who owns TikTok. Whether the court finds that to be a First Amendment issue, we'll see. I think it is, because you're talking about banning it based on who owns a platform. Now, I know that people on TikTok are absolutely losing their minds about this because their argument, which I think is also quite bizarre, is that the government can't control TikTok, so they want to ban it, which is also not at all what it's got to do with. It's like, so I'm in this very weird spot where it's like, I also don't like the ban, but the people who are yelling about the ban the loudest are the ones who understand the ban the least, right? Because from a national security perspective, I understand the impetus behind the ban, right? Talking about like I understand banning certain things, but at the same time, the American people, myself included, made a choice to sign up for this app, and what you do with that. You know, how you process that information, whether or not you sign away that data, you know, from my perspective, it's like, well, the Chinese have my data anyway. What the hell do I care? You know, so, you know, from that perspective, I think it sends a bad sign that we are banning any social media app based on who owns it. It has as much to do with that First Amendment argument as it does with the ability of people to create content, make a living on TikTok. Can ByteDance solve this by selling the app tomorrow? Absolutely. And there are people who want to buy it, right? Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank has said he's got a consortium that would pay $20 billion for it. Right. So that would eliminate the national security concern. I don't think that, but I still think ultimately at the end of the day that there are constitutional concerns about outlawing a platform based on who owns it. Because if you do that, that opens up a slippery slope to banning other platforms based on who owns them. And I don't think that's a place the country should want to go.
Very
Any
good point.
predictions as to how you think it'll come out?
I think that it's going to be a 5-4 decision. I won't say which way though. I think it could go either way. I really do. I think when the decision comes out, it will be a very interesting coalition on both sides. Like, I think you're going to see serious crossover. Like, I firmly believe Clarence Thomas will vote to overturn. You know, I truly believe that, just based on constitutional concerns. And Alito might too. But we'll see. Look, I mean, you never know what the court's going to do. I mean, yeah, just go back and look at John Roberts' decision on the Obamacare, on the Obamacare ruling, which was still one of the more bizarre and right, strange rulings that have ever occurred at the Supreme Court. But I think it will be a 5-4 decision. But my gut tells me they will overturn it. But it's a close call either way.
There's certainly a temptation to kick the can down the road past the 19th.
That is also true, especially considering the president-elect has indicated he will be the hero and remove the ban, which, you know, we'll see if that happens too. I think that Trump will decide to try to use it as leverage as it relates to tariffs or imports. That would be certainly within his normal course of operations. But at the same time, and that's the really bizarre thing about this when we see the reaction on TikTok. So many people who voted for Biden and Harris are calling the government fascist for wanting to ban TikTok. But they also think Donald Trump's the fascist and he's the one who's going to remove the ban. It's a very bizarre dynamic and bizarre world that some of these folks are occupying there on TikTok. But that says more about the lack of civics education in this country than it does anything else.
Well, it's very hard. We're used to having these absolute boundary lines between one side and the other, and when the coalitions get fragmented the way this issue does, it gets very confusing for folks.
Well, as I've said, I think, you know, if you start looking at the coalitions are all on one side. So much of the coalition in Washington is left-leaning on both sides, and you have very few people who lean to the right in Washington anymore. It's just a matter of how far to the left that you've actually gone. It's very bizarre. It's almost like the old Rockefeller Republican days, and that Trump has brought that back to the Republican Party, which is very frustrating for those of us who worked for the Republican Party for so long, that you've seen the conservative coalition just absolutely just hammered in order to rebuild the old establishment coalition, except they call it non-establishment. It's a very weird, interesting, you know, the proverb, "May you live in interesting times," has never been more true.
So shifting to Maryland, what's your take on how Governor Moore is doing and his prospects with the budget and likely or possible tax increase, at least that he'll be promoting?
It's hard to remember that Wes Moore is governor because he's so busy running for president that he seems to forget he's actually the governor. You know, we always said that with Wes it'll be less, and that's never really been more true. My favorite statement that Moore has made recently is he was asked a question about the Maryland Freedom Caucus, and that's a whole other issue that I've got a problem with. But he was asked about the Maryland Freedom Caucus. He said, I don't point fingers, I point direction. And I find that very curious, considering he spent most of this month trying to point fingers at Larry Hogan for the structural deficit in the budget, which is it shows Moore's lack of education about Maryland politics. I mean, we knew he didn't know anything. We knew he lacked any information, any background in Maryland politics when he ran for governor. But it goes to show you how little he understands. If he really understood, he would know that the reason the structural deficit exists is because of mandates put on there by the Democrats. Do I think Governor Hogan spent too much in his last couple of years as governor? Absolutely. But most of the mandates, almost all the mandates that are in place right now that are causing the structural deficit are Kerwin related and are other mandates that were put in there by the Democrats in the General Assembly, notwithstanding the vetoes of Governor Hogan. It's a really hard sell for Wes Moore to get people to buy into this if people remember the Hogan years and people remember that Governor Hogan was really railroaded by the Democrats when it comes to a lot of these spending mandates that he vetoed.
And despite all that, we had a surplus, which, he basically has gone through, kind of like how Sherman went through Atlanta, and same way Martin O'Malley went through Bob Ehrlich's surplus, frankly.
Exactly. And it reminds me of how frustrating it was to watch the Republicans in Maryland basically just surrender the governor's mansion to Wes Moore and just basically give up without a fight by nominating a candidate in 2022 who had no chance of winning.
And hopefully, by the way, here's a question for you. Let me throw this out to you. What do you think of the prospects of somebody like, say, David Trone primarying Wes Moore in 2 years?
David Trone has said he's out of the game, that he's going to go back to running Total Wine.
No, actually, he said the opposite.
Did he?
He said he's not going back to and he wants to focus on, and he wants to get involved in Prince George's County, and he wants to get involved with his philanthropy and helping people. Forgive me, this was a story that I wish the Duckpin were back in business, at least in a general sense, because I think it's an interesting story that David Trone is potentially a real threat to Wes Moore. Because
I think when push comes to shove, that Wes Moore would get his ass, or would kick his ass. I mean, I really do. I think we saw that David Trone can't beat the establishment candidate. When the establishment backs one candidate, the establishment would get behind Wes Moore because the establishment would never back a white male candidate against a minority candidate. I mean, we saw that in the Senate. I mean, that's the way it is. It's just the way it is in Maryland.
So the dynamic is that if he doesn't go forward with the blueprint, the teachers union, which you recall, endorsed him in the Senate primary. So to the extent that the establishment was supporting also Brooks, at least the teachers union were on the other side. So if he delays on the blueprint, you've got the club in the closet, which is David Trone. On the other hand, if the taxes go the wrong way, I mean, his approval rating is good, but it's only a little above 50%. A tax increase has a history of really changing that.
I think ultimately Moore is not going to delay the blueprint. He's going to try to push forward with this, and if he does have it delayed, he's going to get the Democrats in the General Assembly to delay it for him, and he would let it pass, notwithstanding, without his signature, because then he could at least fade the heat to them and say, well, I didn't do it, because we all know Wes Moore doesn't like to take the blame for anything. He does not accept responsibility. He's almost worse than Martin O'Malley in that regard.
Let me throw out a theory for you there. What do you think of this? I'm just thinking aloud here. Wes Moore says he doesn't want to raise taxes.
Well, he does now, though. Now he does.
Let me work through my theory.
Sure, sorry.
So he vetoes the bigger tax increase that the legislature will set him. They'll override him. He runs against the General Assembly in 2026. I didn't want to raise the taxes this high. I only wanted to raise it on those evil rich people. As a theory, he runs against that, which I think could play and help Republicans.
It's everybody. And of course, at that point, and look, the fix would be in. Like, that might be the plan. Democrats in the General Assembly might talk to Wes Moore and say, hey, we're going to do this, you can do that, and we all win. It's, because we know this, Wes Moore doesn't understand Maryland politics, and he is letting Maryland politics control him instead of controlling Maryland politics. Now, to be fair, to a certain extent, if he knew what he was doing, we might be a lot worse off than we already are, because then he could really screw the place up. But since he's too busy doing photo ops and running for president, I just wish we had an adult in the room. That's all I want. For 8 years, we had an adult in the room, and now we don't have any adults in the room, and that's pretty damn frustrating.
And there are no adult Democrat legislatures either. There's no more Mike Miller, Mike Bush, even Catherine Taylor for that matter.
Interesting. Let me push back a little bit on that. I think there's an interesting dynamic of the split between the Senate and the speaker, between Ferguson and the speaker.
No, there is.
There really is, and so the quote unquote veto override theory. The downside to that is that for a handful of Senate Democrats, they would put them in the difficult position of having quote unquote been the deciding vote.
Yep.
I have no doubt that you're right that the speaker could get through. Could get through any kind of tax increase. I probably am exaggerating. But the real fly in the ointment, so to speak, is the resistance that would happen in the Senate. And I think Ferguson.
Here's the thing, though. Redistricting was done in such a way by the General Assembly, who just completely ran roughshod over Governor Hogan's plan. Right. There's enough Democrats in the General Assembly to override the veto, but still enough seats Democrats left over to let the legislators who would be facing a tough general election to take a walk and not vote against the veto. I know you start getting like 4 and 5 dimensional chess at that point, but that's the kind of thing Mike Miller would have thought of. Right. I don't know if Bill Ferguson will, but Mike Miller sure as hell would have.
Yeah, but I mean, Brian, like the old Sid Saab seat, that would be back in play if they vote. If especially if Westmore goes, "Hey, I tried to keep your taxes low," and
but he would let her take a walk though. Ferguson would absolutely let her take a walk and not vote for that veto override.
True.
Absolutely.
True. That is sad but true. Sad but true.
I mean, you got to look at it you got to look at it objectively. It's like, their objective is twofold: get their people reelected and pass the legislation they want to pass. How the calculus they do that is how they get to those positions in the first place and keep them, right? It's Mike Miller was there for 40 years because he knew everybody, he knew everything, and he knew how to keep everybody happy. And if Bill Ferguson wants to be in that position for as long as Mike Miller did, and I'm not saying he does, then he better have picked up on that skill. And there are plenty of people advising Bill Ferguson who are veterans of that Mike Miller process who would be more than happy to guide him through it.
I guess that's why we haven't been in the majority since 1898 in Maryland State House, huh?
It's been a minute, and we missed that golden opportunity in 2018 when the national winds were blowing against us, and it was, we lost quite a few seats that would have otherwise been Republican seats had the national wind not been blowing against us.
I think that's quite true. So this is at the time of the show that we usually kind of give people an opportunity. You've been promoting what you've been doing forward on Duckpin. How's the subscription holding up? Are you getting paid subscription? Are you happy with the way the progress is going?
Any progress is good progress, and we've been slowly working there, right? I mean, we have plenty of free subscribers, but the number of paid subscribers keeps ticking up. And look, I'm quitting my job over it, but it pays. It covers some of the stuff that we need to do, and kind of it'll pay the corporate structure.
Covers your Tim Horton addiction, right?
My what?
Your Timmy Horton coffee addiction.
What's funny is the fact that we were up in New York recently and I didn't go to Timmy's, so that makes me sad that I forgot to do that. But no, it covers. No, it covers enough, and anything more than zero is more than I was making for a long time doing this. So we used to call it a labor of love, and now it's like, all right, well, let's at least make it feel a little like work.
Sounds good.
So you're going to join us at Missoni's now?
Join a what?
Join us at Missoni's for a late dinner at Greg Missoni's restaurant, his daughter's restaurant, I should say, in Perry Hall. Wonderful
Dude,
place.
I don't leave the house anymore. It's great.
I know, you don't even leave Anne Arundel County.
Like, you got Anne Arundel County. It's like, I don't go anywhere. I don't do anything. That was the one good thing about not being an affiliated party member anymore is nobody invites me to anything, and I don't have to pay anybody to go anywhere. So, not saying that I would be welcome at a lot of Republican places right now, but I haven't been to a political event in 4 years.
I think the last event was a pizza club event over at Pasquale's at Bella Napoli in Park, I guess.
Well, it's past even, and it's not even Bella Napoli anymore. So,
what's it called now?
Well, Pasquale's family sold it. It's now Pasta and Vino or something like that. I haven't been over there since they changed the name. Yeah, so I forgot about that. So, it's the last real big political event was 4 years ago. It's the only one I've been to since the pandemic. And the only other political event was, I sadly had to go to Diana's funeral. I was very happy to be there for her family, but I was, sad that we lost Diana. I still think people underestimate what she did to save the party, which is really kind of amusing considering, I was running Greg's campaign against her back in 2013. But, I think ultimately even Greg will tell you she was the right choice at the right time. And, it was, putting that team in place together is one of the reasons why Larry Hogan was even won in the first place. And, it's a shame because, Diana, and I hate to bring the room down, but I want to talk about Diana here for a second. Diana brought such a stability to the entire process that so many people in the Republican Party for years lacked. And I could name names, and I'm not going to, but it's the usual suspects. And it was never personal. It was just business. And her goal was to try to get everybody pulling in the same direction, as opposed to trying to, dividing and conquering and trying to do that. And, I think that the Maryland Republican Party would be in much better shape if they had leadership that was doing that right now at the top.
You're absolutely right. She had a capacity to turn down the heat that with people. She did a good job of that.
And she won over a lot of opponents who were not with her when she ran for chairman.
100%.
You and I think being one of them,
yeah,
or two of them actually. And there's a lot of people, and she did win over a lot of people, you know.
I mean, you can see, you saw that, that funeral was a who's who of Republicans from every stripe of Republican or ex-Republican you can think of. And, it's amazing how filled that church was with people from her life, both, her real quote unquote life, but also her political life, and that people put aside. I mean, it's the only time I've been in a room with John Wafer in the last 8 years. Let me think about that for a second. So, I
gotta send you that video. I think you'd have fun with that video, bro.
Yeah, you should. Anyway, but I think we missed that as a party, as people who were involved, in this, that sometimes, the issues are important and the stakes are high sometimes, but at the end of the day, everybody's people. We're all children of God at the end of the day. And, we a lot of times forget that in the heat of the moment. And she had that capacity to kind of bring it all together.
I think that's a great note to end on. I think remembering what her contributions and Brian, we wish you well.
Thank you much.
We hope
appreciate the chance to be here.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you on again.
I'll open my schedule up. You just got to make sure that the kids don't have me doing something else,
I guess we have to do it before the spring soccer season and lacrosse.
Oh, we don't let them play soccer. That's a whole other conversation we could have another time.
Okay. Well, we're headed. Don't forget to visit Greg Missoni's daughter's restaurant in Perry Hall, Missoni's, where the food is wonderful. They got Squire's Pizza, homemade ice cream, which uses the I believe it's the Masoni family recipe they use. Everybody, if you're in Perry Hall, even if you're not, it's worth the drive. It's great food. Visit Masoni's. And with that, good night, everyone.
Bye. Bye now.
Okay, good. A minute, good.